The cold was a living thing. It wrapped around Millie Harper and her 3 children, a predator made of ice and wind. They were huddled at a frozen crossroads, nothing but rags between their skin and the endless biting white of the Dakota winter. Her oldest, Eli, was 8. He stared into the swirling snow, his small jaw set like iron. He wouldn't shiver. He wouldn't give the cold the satisfaction. 6-year-old June tucked her face into Millie's skirt, humming a song with no tune, a tiny noise of defiance against the roaring wind. Little Sammy, just 3, was a dead weight in her arms, his breath a faint puff of steam. They were starving. They were freezing. They were out of time. That morning, the town had cast them out. The innkeeper, a woman with eyes like chips of flint named Clarabelle, had sneered at her. "We don't need your kind here." The sheriff had been worse. He'd stood on his porch, barely pushing against his vest, and told her to keep moving. He hadn't even looked at her. Just keep moving. But there was nowhere left to move to. The world was a frozen grave, and it was opening its arms for her children. Millie pulled them closer, a desperate, useless gesture against the storm. She closed her eyes, imagining them still and silent, covered in a blanket of snow. The thought was a knife in her heart. "Mama will find a way," she whispered, the words stolen by the wind as soon as they left her lips. And that's when she heard it. Not the wind, something else. The groan of wood, the heavy tread of horses. A wagon. A man was guiding the team through the blizzard, a silhouette against the grey sky. He was a giant, his shoulders hunched against the storm. He pulled the horses to a stop, the steam from their nostrils pluming in the frigid air. He just sat there for a long moment, watching them. Millie stared back, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Was this salvation or something worse? She had seen men look at her before. Men who saw her hunger and her worn dress and thought she was easy prey. But this man's gaze was different. It wasn't hungry, it was empty. As empty as the landscape around them. Finally, he climbed down from the wagon. He didn't speak. He just shrugged off his own heavy coat, the one thing keeping him alive in this storm, and wrapped it around her children. The warmth of his body still clung to the wool. Millie flinched, startled by the simple, silent act of kindness. "My ranch is a mile from here," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough like gravel. "There's a fire." She hesitated. The world had taught her that nothing was free. "We have no coin." "I didn't ask for any," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. June let out a shiver so violent it seemed to shake her whole body. That decided it. Millie gave a single sharp nod. The man, whose name she still didn't know, lifted her children one by one into the wagon, wrapping them in thick horse blankets. He helped her up last. She didn't thank him. The word felt too small, too dangerous. Hope was a fragile thing, and she wasn't ready to hold it yet. The ranch was a fortress against the storm, a large, dark house with smoke curling from a single chimney. It looked lonely, imposing, but it was shelter. Inside, a fire roared in a stone hearth. The air was warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke. The man, who introduced himself only as David McGrath, set a loaf of hard bread and a slab of salt pork on a rough wooden table. Millie didn't wait to be asked. She moved to the fire, slicing the bread, warming the meat. The children ate like starving wolves, their eyes wide. When they were done, they collapsed onto a pile of quilts near the hearth and fell into a deep, exhausted sleep. Millie sat by the fire, the warmth a strange feeling on her frozen skin. She could feel David's eyes on her. The silence in the house was heavy, thick with things unsaid. "I'll work," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'll cook. I'll clean. Don't turn us out." David leaned against the stone mantelpiece, his face a mask of shadow and firelight. "You'll do what you can," he said. It wasn't an offer, it was a statement of fact. For the first time in a long time, Millie felt a flicker of something other than fear. But as the storm howled outside, a new kind of chill settled over her. This house was a refuge, but it was also a mystery, and its master was a man made of silence and shadows. She had escaped the storm, but she had a terrible feeling she had just walked into a different kind of trap. The days that followed fell into a strange, quiet rhythm. Millie cooked and cleaned, stretching their meager supplies with a skill born of desperation. The house slowly began to feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Color returned to her children's cheeks. Eli learned to carve scraps of wood with David's knife. June started singing again. David remained a mystery. He worked from sunup to sundown, his movements efficient and silent. He rarely spoke, but Millie would sometimes catch him watching her children, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. It wasn't warmth. It was something closer to calculation. The house had secrets. On the second floor, at the end of a long, dark hallway, was a door that was always locked. When she asked David what was inside, his face shuttered. "My late wife's room," he said, his voice flat, final. "It stays closed." One day he had to ride into town for supplies. He hesitated before leaving, his gaze sweeping over Millie and the children. "Don't answer the door for anyone," he said. "No one." The warning sent a shiver down her spine. While he was gone, Millie's curiosity got the better of her. She found a small rusted key on a hook in the kitchen. Her hands trembled as she walked down the hall and put the key in the lock. It turned with a heavy click. The room was frozen in time. Dust motes danced in the single sliver of light from a boarded-up window. A four-poster bed was neatly made. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a half-finished piece of knitting still in its basket. It was the room of a woman who expected to come back. But there was something else. Scratches. Long, deep gouges in the wooden doorframe on the inside, as if someone had been clawing to get out. Millie backed away, her heart hammering. This wasn't a memorial. It was a prison. When David returned, he knew instantly. He didn't have to ask. He saw it in her eyes. The silence that fell between them was no longer quiet. It was charged, dangerous. The whispers started when Millie had to fetch water from the town well. Clarabelle, the innkeeper, saw her from across the street. Her eyes narrowed with venom. "Look at that," Clarabelle said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The little widow didn't waste any time finding a new bed to warm. The laughter from the men on the inn's porch was cruel. But then Sheriff Hayes stepped out of his office. He wasn't laughing. He walked over to Millie, his expression grim. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low, "I'm telling you this for your own good. You and your children would be safer in the storm than in that man's house." "He's been kind to us," Millie stammered. "Was he kind to his first wife?" The sheriff shot back. "Her name was Sarah, Clarabelle's sister. She died of a fever," he said. "A sudden one. So sudden nobody saw her sick but him. We found her in that room, the one he keeps locked." The sheriff leaned closer. "There are stories, ma'am, about his temper, about the way Sarah changed after she married him. She got quiet, fearful. Just before she died, she sent a letter to Clarabelle. It said she was afraid, that David wasn't who he seemed." Millie's blood ran cold. The scratches on the door, the locked room, David's silence. It all clicked into place, forming a terrifying picture. "He's got a darkness in him," the sheriff warned. "You get your children and you run." But where could she run to? The snow was starting to fall again, thicker this time. Another blizzard was rolling in, bigger than the last. She was trapped in a warm house with a roaring fire, with a man who had saved her life. A man who might be a monster. The storm hit like a fist. Snow buried the world, piling up against the doors and windows, sealing them inside David's fortress. The wind screamed, a relentless, shrieking rage that seemed to be trying to tear the house apart. For 3 days, they were prisoners. The tension inside was worse than the storm outside. David was a coiled spring, his silence heavier than ever. Millie moved around him like a mouse in the shadow of a hawk, her body humming with terror. She kept the children close, never letting them out of her sight. She had to know the truth. On the third night of the storm, when the wind was at its peak, she waited until David was in the barn, checking on the animals. Her heart pounding, she took the key and went back to the locked room. This time she wasn't just looking, she was searching. She pulled open the drawers of a small writing desk. They were empty. She ran her hands under the mattress. Nothing. Frantic, she dropped to her knees and felt along the dusty floorboards beneath the bed. Her fingers brushed against a loose board. Prying it up, she reached into the darkness beneath. Her hand closed around a small leather-bound book. A diary. Sarah McGrath's diary. Millie's hands shook so badly she could barely read the elegant looping script. The first few entries were happy, filled with love for her new husband and their remote ranch. But then the tone began to change. October 12th. David is so watchful. He says it is because he loves me, but his eyes are always on me. I feel like a bird in a cage. November 3rd. He doesn't like me going to town anymore. He says the people are gossips, that they will fill my head with nonsense. He says I only need him. The silence out here is so loud. December 1st. I tried to speak to Clarabelle today. David found out. The look on his face. I have never seen such anger. He did not raise his hand to me, but I felt the force of it. He said I had betrayed his trust. The entries grew more frantic, the handwriting more jagged. December 20th. He has begun locking the door. He says it is for my own safety, that the winter makes me fanciful and I might wander into the storm. But he locks it from the outside. I am his prisoner. January 5th. I am so cold, not from the winter. It is a coldness inside me. He brings me food, but he stands in the doorway and watches me eat. He says I am unwell. Am I unwell? Or is he the one making me sick? I fear him. I fear what he will do when he grows tired of this game. The last entry was almost illegible, a desperate scrawl. January 10th. He knows I wrote to Clarabelle. He found the letter. He says that no one is coming for me, that everyone will believe his story. He says this is the only way. God help me. Millie slammed the diary shut, a gasp of pure terror catching in her throat. The sheriff was right. Clarabelle was right. David was a monster. He had driven his wife mad, imprisoned her, and then, what? Let the fever take her. The floorboards creaked in the hallway. He was back. She shoved the diary back under the floorboard just as the bedroom door swung open. David stood there, silhouetted against the dim light from the hall. Snow clung to his beard and shoulders. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Millie scrambled to her feet, backing away until her legs hit the bed frame. "I know what you did," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know what you did to her." She expected rage, a denial, an explosion of the violence she now knew he was capable of. Instead, his broad shoulders slumped. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a grief so profound it was like looking into a bottomless well. "You read it," he said. It wasn't a question. He took a step into the room and she flinched. He stopped, holding up his hands as if to show he was unarmed. "That diary," he said, his voice ragged with pain, "that is the story of a woman losing her mind, and a husband who was too young and too scared to know how to save her." He looked past Millie at the scratches on the door. "Sarah was not well after our son was stillborn. The silence of this place, it got inside her. She started to believe things, that I was poisoning her food, that I was trying to hurt her." He finally looked at Millie, his eyes pleading. "The doctors in town called it melancholy. They told me to keep her quiet. I thought I was protecting her, by keeping her here, away from the gossip, away from the stairs. I locked the door because she tried to run into a blizzard wearing nothing but her nightgown. The scratches, those were from her trying to get out. But they were also from me, on the other side, holding the door shut, begging her to calm down, my own hands bleeding." He reached into his coat and pulled out not a weapon, but a packet of worn, folded letters. She wrote to Clarabelle, yes. But Clarabelle wrote back. She told her sister to be a good wife, to obey her husband. She didn't believe her, not until it was too late. He held out the letters. The fever. It was a real fever. It came on fast. By the time I realized how sick she was, it had taken hold. I sat in this room with her for 2 days, trying to bring it down. She died in my arms. I told everyone it was just the fever because I couldn't bear to have them call her crazy. I wanted to protect her memory. But my silence just made me look guilty." Millie stared at him, the diary's terrifying words warring with the raw, undeniable grief on his face. Could this be the truth? A story not of murder, but of a terrible, heartbreaking tragedy. Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from downstairs. Not the wind, it was the sound of fists on the front door. "McGrath!" a voice roared over the storm. "Open this door. We know you've got her in there." It was the sheriff. David's head snapped up, his expression shifting from grief to a grim, weary resolve. It seems the town has decided my trial is over. Through the frosted window, Millie could see them, a group of men, silhouetted by torchlight against the swirling snow. The sheriff. And at the front, her face twisted with righteous fury, was Clarabelle. They had come to save her. But as Millie looked at the broken man standing before her, at the letters in his hand, and thought of her own children sleeping peacefully by the fire, she realized they were wrong. David McGraw wasn't the villain. He was just another survivor, and she was the only one who could prove it. "Stay here," David said, his voice low and urgent. He moved toward the door, his body a solid wall between her and the hallway. "No," Millie said, her voice finding a strength she didn't know it possessed. She pushed past him, grabbing the packet of letters from his hand. "They came for me. They'll listen to me." She ran down the stairs, her heart pounding a frantic drumbeat. The front door shuddered under another heavy blow. "Open up, McGraw, or we'll break it down," the sheriff yelled. Millie reached the door and fumbled with the heavy bar. She slid it back and pulled the door open. The wind and snow tore into the house, extinguishing the lamps in the entry hall, plunging them into a chaotic world of shadow and torchlight. Clarabelle pushed forward, her face a mask of triumph and hate. "Millie, thank God, we've come to get you away from this monster." The sheriff and two other men surged in behind her, their rifles raised. "You're wrong," Millie said, her voice ringing out over the storm. She stood her ground, blocking their path. "All of you, you're wrong." "He's filled your head with lies," Clarabelle hissed, "just like he did with my sister." "No," Millie said, holding up the letters. "Your sister told you the truth in her letters, and you didn't listen. You told her to be a better wife. You abandoned her." Clarabelle recoiled as if struck. The sheriff lowered his rifle a few inches, his brow furrowed in confusion. David had come down the stairs behind Millie. He didn't look at the men with guns. He looked at Clarabelle. "I loved your sister," he said, his voice cracking with 2 years of unshed grief. "I failed her. I was a boy trying to do a man's job, and I failed. But I did not hurt her. The sickness took her. My silence was born of shame, Clarabelle, not guilt." He pulled the small, leather-bound diary from his own pocket. Not Sarah's, his. "I kept a journal too," he said, his voice thick. He opened it and read. "December 21st. Sarah screamed for hours today. She does not know who I am. She looks at me with terror. The doctor says there is nothing to be done. I feel a winter in my own soul, colder than the one outside." He looked at the sheriff. "I have lived in a prison of my own making since the day she died. This woman and her children, they brought a light back into this house, a warmth I thought I'd never feel again." Millie stepped forward, her gaze unwavering as she looked at each man in turn. "This man took us in from a storm that would have killed us. He fed my children from his own plate. He gave us shelter and asked for nothing. That is not the work of a monster. That is the work of a good man. A man drowning in a grief you were all too quick to mistake for evil." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the howling of the wind. The torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The sheriff looked from David's tear-streaked face to Clarabelle's, which had crumpled into a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He looked at the letters in Millie's hand and at the quiet dignity with which she stood beside the man she was defending. He slowly lowered his rifle completely. The other men followed his lead. "Clarabelle," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with condemnation, "your hate has made you blind. You've been poisoning this town with your bitterness for 2 years. Go home." Clarabelle stared, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The fire of her certainty had been extinguished, leaving only the cold ashes of the truth. She turned and stumbled out into the storm, a broken woman. The sheriff looked at David. "I reckon we owe you an apology, McGraw." He tipped his hat to Millie. "And to you, ma'am." He herded his men back out the door, closing it softly behind them, leaving the 3 of them in the sudden, profound quiet of the house. The storm had passed, both the one outside and the one that had raged for 2 long years. Millie looked at David, really looked at him for the first time. She saw the lines of sorrow etched around his eyes, but she also saw the immense relief of a man unburdened. He looked back at her, his gaze filled with a gratitude that needed no words. In that quiet moment, a new foundation was laid, not on silence and suspicion, but on a shared, brutal truth. Eli, June, and Sammy, woken by the commotion, came and stood by their mother, their small hands clutching her dress. David knelt, so he was on their level. "This is your home now," he said, his voice soft, "if you'll have it." June smiled, a bright, brilliant thing. Eli nodded, his chest puffed out with a new kind of pride. Millie's eyes filled with tears, but for the first time in a very long time, they weren't tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of hope. She had walked out of a blizzard and into a stranger's house, fearing for her life. But she had found something she thought she had lost forever. A family. A future. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars of the past would remain, but they would face it together. A fortress built not of wood and stone, but of resilience and truth. What do you think? Was justice truly served in this story, or was Clarabelle a victim too? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of survival and redemption.